I think Jim Comey is worthy of round criticism and has received round criticism from both parties, pointed criticism. That doesn't mean that now it's open game to just indict him for kicks or retribution. You have to be able to say, okay, I disprove things this person's done, but what's being done to him now is absolutely inappropriate and unnecessary and potentially dangerous.
Welcome to Elected. I'm your host, Luke Radel, joined this week by senior legal analyst for CNN, Elie Honig, who is the perfect person to talk to during our current news cycle of all manner of legal and illegal things happening in our government. Elie and I met first at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last spring. I got to nerd out all over him about how incredible I think he is as a legal analyst, and both my parents are attorneys, so I know a thing or two about the way our courts operate. I've seen plenty of attorneys on TV who are not nearly as insightful as Elie is. He actually has a new book out called When You Come at the King, which is about this very issue that we're seeing so often, the prosecution of political figures, particularly presidents, people around the president, or presidential candidates, even presidential family members like Hunter Biden, the history of special counsels and investigations of that nature. So the new book is out. I've had a chance to read it. I think it's great, and I highly recommend it to everyone else. We were initially going to do this interview over the phone because Elie is obviously a very busy person, writing all sorts of articles and being on CNN all the time. But then he had a window open up in his schedule where he could do something via Zoom while also multitasking a little bit. So here is my interview with Elie Honig in transit. Elie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it.
Well, Luke, thank you for joining me on my walk to the supermarket. I got to get stuff for dinner tonight, and I think we've reached a nice compromise here. We're going to chat. I'm going to give you some time, and I'm going to be doing my daily business.
This is fantastic. Thank you for multitasking with me. First of all, I want to talk to you about so much because I read the book and I really enjoyed it. When You Come at the King.
I love that. Yeah.
What gave you the inclination, though, to write the book in the first place? Was there anything in the news that was happening that kind of spurred this line of inquiry?
So the short version is everything in the news, everything that I cover in the news in my legal capacity. This is my third book in a 5-year stretch. I did books in 2021, 23, and now 25. And after the first two, I just thought, like, I'm kind of tapped out. I've kind of said everything I need to say. I'm sure I'll do a book in the future, but 5-10 years in the future. And as the Trump prosecutions really ramped up, I started to have this concept. And I'll tell you, I got the concept for the book from a different book, from George Stephanopoulos. Wrote a book about the Situation, called The Situation Room, about the history of the White House Situation Room. And what he does is he takes this important governmental institution, the Situation Room, and he sort of tells it in chapters of history, right? The Cuban Missile Crisis, on through the Cold War, 9/11. I'm skipping things, but and I thought, oh my God, that is a perfect structure for what I can do here. I can go back to Watergate and Iran-Contra and Clinton and Ken Starr, all the way up through the cases I've been covering over the last several years, Mueller and Robert Hur and Jack Smith and all that. And it just, as soon as I pitched that to my editor at HarperCollins, he said, "Yep, that's it. That's what we're doing. Let's go." Yeah. And so it just sort of came together really organically. My advice for you or anyone else thinking about writing a book is A, do it, but B, don't do it until you're sure you have a greght topic, because you spend a lot of time with it. So yeah, that's how this came about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's so funny because I really enjoyed that book as well from George Stephanopoulos about the Situation Room.
Yeah.
And I never made the connection, but you're right. It is formatted exactly the same way, but that's such a funny.
Yeah, and I openly, it's funny. I told somebody else that I pulled the inspiration for the structure from that. Who the hell was it? And it was someone else on a podcast, someone you probably know. And they were like, same here. Like, I saw or something about his book inspired them to write a book too. So yeah.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Now, I want to get into the weeds on so many of the different cases, things that probably people in my audience of younger people had no recollection of at all.
Right.
In light of the news that broke just late last week and the reason why I reached out, your book, written prior to all of this, obviously, has a pretty scathing assessment of James Comey and of his work in connection to several different cases. Talk a little bit about who James Comey is, what his role was in several of these different prosecutions of the president and people close to him.
Well,
or
there's
potential candidates.
There's two things out of my book, which, you finished writing. I guess I finished writing this thing in, maybe March or April of this year. Yeah. One, as I thought you were going, but maybe we'll get there later, is the end of the book basically says this is what's going to happen. Like Trump's going to seek retribution on. That's why the title, "When You Come at the King, You Best Not Miss." Trump's going to seek retribution on everyone who he perceives to have wronged him. That has come to pass. The first person to receive that in the form of indictment is Jim Comey. As you correctly say, he comes off quite poorly in the book. I'm very critical of him. I don't know Jim Comey. You know, he was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York right up until like a couple months before I started there. So I just missed him. As I say in the book, I've met him a handful of times. We've had, 5-10 minute conversations in the green room and that kind of thing. He's a nice guy. But as I say in the book, when I started at the U.S. Attorney's Office, everyone there, not everyone, but a whole bunch of people there had been hired by him and revered him. He was this revered figure. He'd done the biggest, most important cases. He had become the deputy U.S. Attorney General. Later, he'd become the FBI director. But he really went off the rails. He gave us hints of it with the Pat Fitzgerald appointment. Pat Fitzgerald actually now represents Jim Comey. But on the Scooter Libby case, when Comey did what I would call doing a Comey, he saw the rules about how special counsel works. He thought, okay, those are rules. Rules are important. But if I think better of them, I get to make it up as I want. And that's what he did when he appointed Pat Fitzgerald. He kind of did it within the rules, but he also kind of did it beyond the rules. Where Comey became really a high-profile, infamous national figure was before the 2016 election with the investigation of Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. So Loretta Lynch was the attorney general at the time. I fault her as well. She has this case, this investigation of Hillary Clinton, who is at that point obviously going to be the Democratic nominee. She had been a member of that same cabinet. Clinton had been the Secretary of Defense, State, of course. And so I argued that they should have appointed a special counsel right away, but they didn't. Loretta Lynch then has this weird meeting on an airport tarmac on private planes with Bill Clinton. He comes into her plane. Apparently, they don't discuss anything to do with the case, but Loretta Lynch herself says publicly that meeting cast a shadow, that's her word, on the case. Now, at this point, it's screaming out for an outside prosecutor, special counsel. Lynch still doesn't do that. Instead, she says, I'm going to defer to the FBI, which is a bizarre way to handle this. And that means Jim Comey, who was the head of the FBI at the time. And Comey just runs wild. He takes all the power for himself. He violates the DOJ chain of command. He makes public announcements when he shouldn't have. And essentially twice in the weeks and days leading up to the 2016 election, he makes these announcements about how Hillary Clinton won't be charged, but she was reckless and what she did was irresponsible and all this. And I get into it in the book a bit about, did he actually swing the 2016 election or not? The short answer from looking at various people who ran the data is probably, but we can't know for sure. And so Comey since then has sort of become this figure of hubris and self-aggrandizement. He loves to sort of, now he positions himself as this like poet of the MAGA resistance, who happens to be always running across signs in nature that, seashells magically arrange, like get rid of Donald Trump and stuff. So I don't, and Comey, look, this isn't a personal opinion, this part of it. Comey has been found in official findings by the Justice Department to have violated the rules, to have bent the truth. I quote in the book 3 different AGs, 1 Democrat and 2 Republicans, who all have very pointed criticisms of him and the way he seizes and uses power. Now, all that said, this indictment looks to be BS, the current indictment of him, and absolutely vindictive, and I don't approve of it at all.
Yeah. No, and I'm fascinated by that kind of duality of who he is and what he's been on the public square. One of the ways I got into politics, I was 12 when Donald Trump was elected, and I was watching on the Stephen Colbert show as all of the headlines were coming out, and they did a show about 5 minutes after Comey was fired, and it announces to the audience, James Comey has been fired by Trump, and the audience applauded because in their mind, James Comey was the one who caused Trump to win.
FBI Director James Comey has just been fired by Donald Trump. Wow. Huge Donald Trump fans here tonight. I got a question for the audience. When I said that Comey had been fired by Trump, y'all cheered. Why? Is it because what he did to Hillary? No. But he's investigating Trump's campaign's ties to Russia, which will evaporate like cotton candy in the ocean.
No, you know what you got? They were riding a wave. That was like a beginner surfers class where they were like, I'm standing up. Oh, no, wait. Oh no, now I'm on my knees. Hold on. Because
Okay.
it
All
was
right,
that.
so
I hate that guy. I love that guy. But Trump did it, and they didn't know how to feel, and it was interesting to watch.
But now, of course, the reason he was fired as FBI director, Trump stated as much to Lester Holt, was because of the Russia investigation
Right.
and what was going on there. Talk a little bit about that kind of internal, that duality of James Comey and how, if
Yeah.
Donald Trump was to go after a critic, James Comey is one of the least sympathetic for many on the left people to go after.
Yeah, and let me urge you, Luke, as a journalism student, you really have to be able to separate the person, the personality from the facts at hand. Like, I'll give you another, look, I think Jim Comey is worthy of round criticism and has received round criticism from both parties, pointed criticism. That doesn't mean that now it's open game to just indict him for kicks or retribution. You have to be able to say, okay, I disprove things this person's done, but what's being done to him now is absolutely inappropriate and unnecessary and potentially dangerous. And I would say the same thing, by the way, of Donald Trump. I mean, in the book and elsewhere in my coverage, look, the number one person, if you had to quantify it, that I've been critical of in my 7 years in media has been Donald Trump. I mean, naturally so, because he's been president for much of that time. That's always where you're going to be looking. But I've been sharply critical of Donald Trump. That said, I will say, I think it's fair to say, one of the few voices in media that at the time there was all these 4 different indictments and civil suits piling up against him, that I argued that it was overkill. And some of those cases were inappropriate. Some of those cases were transparently political. Letitia James, in particular, the civil suit, Alvin Bragg, who's a good friend of mine, I was very critical of his prosecution. And so I think a lot of people in media approach it like, do I like this person? Is this guy good guy or bad guy? If so, my analysis must follow. But you have to be able to look at somebody and say, I disapprove of a lot of things this person's done, but what's happening to them now is still wrong. Yeah. And so that applies in some odd sense both to Jim Comey and Donald Trump. Not that they're equals, but they've both done a lot of things bad and wrong, but they've both also been on the bad end of retributive prosecutions.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I think Donald Trump has been so interested in getting retribution is because he took, in particular, the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago very personally, and many in his political base also took it that way. And I was in Milwaukee for the Republican convention when that case was basically ended by the judge in Florida, and I feel like we never really fully accounted for why or how that happened because we were busy covering Hulk Hogan ripping off his shirt or whatever. But talk a little bit. I mean, that case got at the fundamental question of our special counsels, this thing that we've been doing, for, in different forms for 50 years. Are we actually allowed to do this, or is this a thing we're actually allowed to do?
So the short answer is we don't know for sure. And you're right. There have been different forms over the years, as you say. There's been different laws in place, and there have been various constitutional challenges. The argument basically is you can't have this unelected person, a special counsel or an independent prosecutor who's unelected, but also not presidentially appointed, not Senate confirmed the way a U.S. attorney or an attorney general would be. And so you kind of have this unconstitutional, unaccountable fourth branch of government. I see some merit in that argument, but I also see the argument that, no, this is a constitutional delegation of the attorney general's very broad powers. It has gone to court. The old system went to court. It was an 8-1 decision upholding it. The dissent was written by Antonin Scalia, and it's called by conservatives the golden dissent, and it's sort of risen lately. I even had some liberals in my book say, Scalia may have been onto something there. So Judge Cannon, in the case you're talking about, Luke, the documents case threw it out. She said this whole, not anything to do with the indictment itself. She just said, this whole special counsel scheme is unconstitutional. Now, unfortunately, we don't know the answer because it was being appealed, of course, and it probably would have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. But then Trump wins and everything gets dismissed. So we kind of got left in limbo there.
Yeah. Well, and I hope we have occasion to talk again. I could talk to you all day about all this stuff. But the last question I have, is viewer submitted. I told you about my father, Judge Radel, who submits a question from the audience saying, good. Why should Luke go to law school?
Oh, I love that question. Because you can make an actual difference in the world around you. I know it sounds cliche, but we used to say when we were prosecutors, and I'm sure your dad would agree as a judge, one of the great things about this job is that the cliches are true. You can actually pursue justice. You can actually help protect your community, you can make decisions to do the right thing. And a lot of times that means not prosecuting or giving someone a break. So if you want a job that's meaningful, that you're, the way I put it is every job has stress to it. It's just a question of whether it's good stress or bad stress. And bad stress is the kind of thing where Sunday night you're thinking, oh God, I can't stay. I can't go through with it. I can't go into the office tomorrow. It's so boring. Why am I using my life and my degree this way? That's not what you have. The good stress that you will have is, holy crap, it's Sunday night. I have a suppression hearing tomorrow. I have a trial starting in 2 weeks. I got to meet with 3 witnesses. Like, this is crazy. How am I going to get it all in? But it's insanely fun and exciting and interesting. That's the good kind of stress. So that's what you'll have, especially if you go into the public service, whether prosecutor, defense, judge, a public interest group, that kind of thing. So that is why you should go to law school.
All right. Well, Elie Honig, thank you so much.
Are you convinced? You don't sound convinced. You sound unconvinced.
Have you found your job in media to be meaningful? I don't know. I have found journalism to be meaningful to me, but I think there's definitely a way to do a hybrid, as you have demonstrated, I think, very well on CNN.
Okay.
There is a way to do a hybrid, but
thank you. No, the journalism turn in my career was totally unexpected, but as fulfilling or more fulfilling than actually being a prosecutor. I'm at a different stage of my life, but yes. So if you can marry the two, then absolutely, God bless.
Very good. Elie, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. We'll have to talk again soon, but the book is incredible. I highly recommend everybody get it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for talking. Good talking to you, Luke.